Excellent. All right, we're live now. So good evening, everyone. My name is Bryce Carter. I'm the Conservation Programs Manager for the Colorado Sierra Club. Really excited to have you on tonight. This Colorado Sierra Club Conservation webinar series is a new ongoing webinar to share our ongoing programs, elevate conservation issues, and involve supporters across the state. These hour-long webinars are designed to be an opportunity for our members, supporters, and partners to learn more about and engage directly with staff and volunteer leaders working on important issues across the state. So tonight, to kick off our presentations with this series, we're going to be having a couple different presenters. We're going to be having Kim Pope with Our Wild America. Emily Hills actually could not make it tonight, so I'll be giving her presentation on behalf of Ready for 100. And then Anna McDevitt is going to be presenting Take Us Home with Beyond Coal. So with that, without further ado, I would love to turn the mic over to Kim Pope to get us started with Our Wild America.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining this evening. I really appreciate it. So my name is Kimberly Pope, generally go by Kim. I am a organizer working on Our Wild America campaign. And as you can see on your screen now, our campaign focuses on protecting Colorado's public forests, national parks, and national monuments. So just a little introduction to me and a little bit about me. So like I said, my name is Kimberly Pope, and I'm an organizing representative with the Sierra Club. And I actually grew up in a little town here in the Southwest called Silver City, New Mexico, and that's where I got my start in the public lands realm. Silver City, New Mexico is near the first ever wilderness ever designated, the Gila Wilderness in the Gila National Forest. And my father was a Forest Service employee, so I had the really great luxury that I didn't realize at the time, but I realize now, of spending most of my weekends outdoors in public lands and enjoying the great things that they had to offer. That's a picture of me there at the Gila Cliff Dwellings National Monument, which are these very cool old cliff dwellings. They're not as big as Mesa Verde National Park here in Colorado, but they're pretty good in size, and they're near where I grew up, and it's probably one of my favorite places to go visit that's a public land. So in terms of working in environmental policy, I actually spent some time working in the Arizona State Legislature on natural resources and agriculture and water committees. So that's kind of where I got my introduction in college to environmental policy, and that's where I started realizing that there were actually people in the Southwest that didn't care about public lands, that wanted to see them in private hands, and that was the first time I'd ever experienced that. And that's what really motivated me to work with the Sierra Club to make sure that these beautiful natural spaces are protected. Great, so a little bit of a background on our campaign. So as I'm sure you all have seen recently since the election, Colorado has really faced a challenge to defend our public lands from certain elected officials and special interests, in particular the fossil fuel industry, who are really promoting this agenda to either sell off our federal public lands or accelerate dirty fuel development in our really beautiful treasured spaces, and also block protections for our nation's most pristine and valued places. And so that's why we are working really hard every day here in Colorado and across the country. As you can see here in this picture, this is us standing outside the Department of Interior office in Washington, D.C., trying to send a message that our public lands are not for sale and they should be protected. So some of our initiatives that we're working on here, specifically in Colorado, the first is to support the Antiquities Act and our national monuments. Recently, the Department of Interior put out a review on 27 national monuments across the country, basically determining whether they would like to keep them in size or eliminate them completely or shrink them. We unfortunately haven't seen the full detailed report of what that's going to be, but we're continuing to work here in Colorado to support our national monuments here and also our national monuments in our neighboring states, especially those that are really important to the native tribes across the Southwest. We also are working in Colorado to just build community momentum, build a movement for the permanent protection of public lands and our special natural places in Colorado. We also engage in what is called the administrative land management process. So all of our public lands in Colorado, they have to be managed by someone, and that's why the agencies like the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management and the Park Service exist to manage these places. But about every 30 years or so, they go through a whole process where they take stock of what's happening out on the lands and determine how they should be managed. And so we actually have an opportunity to put some public comment into that, whether it's, we want to see that these trails have better signage, or we want to make sure that this particular area is protected as if it were a wilderness area, even though it's not technically designated a wilderness area. So that's also something that we are involved in here in Colorado. And then the last thing that we want to focus on is ensuring equitable access to public lands. And what that means is that, with continuing budget cuts for our national parks and forests and public lands, we're really seeing that these places are having to take matters into their own hands and raise fees to get into the public lands, or make it more difficult for everybody to go out and enjoy these lands that are for all of us. And so we want to make sure that while we're also protecting the lands, we want to make sure that we're keeping them equitable and accessible to everybody. So we here in Colorado actually have a really great team of about 10 to 12 volunteers that meet monthly that work on all of these initiatives. And our mission here, as you can see, is to build and facilitate a movement of diverse leaders, activists, and partners in strategic communities to demonstrate support and achieve victories to create large corridors of permanently protected public lands in Colorado. It's a little wonky, but that is what our end goal is every time we meet monthly, every time we do an event such as this one that we had here at Patagonia recently. That's our mission, and that's what we're working to accomplish. So here's some information of what we've done so far. It's, I would say, pretty impressive. This campaign has been running actively for a little over a year now, and we've done some really great work and engaged a lot of people here across Colorado. I won't read everything out loud there, but we've done a lot of great work, and we're hoping to continue to grow our volunteer base and do even more in the future. And that leads me into why now? Why are we doing this now? Well, we've witnessed just since the recent election an unprecedented number of attacks on our public lands, and without strong public support, we could risk losing these places for the future. These places are really important for the history, the culture, and the enjoyment of Colorado, and that's why we are working so hard to make sure that these places have the support that they need and are protected for our children and our grandchildren. So that leads me into something that we have coming up. So on Saturday, September 30th, is actually National Public Lands Day. And it's a great day for people to either go out and enjoy their public lands by doing a service project or educating themselves on something that's out there in nature. Or if you're in Denver, you can join us at Farrell Mountain Company. It's over on Tennyson Street, and we're going to be showing a movie that evening that's about leasing on public lands. So hope anybody can join us. So what can you do to help out with this action? Well, you can volunteer doing numerous things by either going on an outing to our public lands or leading an outing yourself. You can help us by writing comments to your local agencies about how you would like to see your public lands in your area managed, or write comments to the Department of Interior on how special the national monument or national park close to you is. You can like us on social media. I highly recommend liking the Sierra Club Colorado Facebook page, Twitter, all of that great stuff. We post some really great pictures and updates on all of our work on those platforms. Like I said, you can attend an outing to learn more about the public lands near you. Or you can share your story on social media. We've got those 2 hashtags there that we use. And the last one, which we always like to say, is you can bring a friend. Go on an outing, bring a friend, get other people involved to make sure that we're continuing to build this movement to protect our public lands here in Colorado. So that's all I have to wrap up. I would just like to provide everyone my email address there. If you have any follow-up questions that you think of after this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me.
Great, and we will have time at the end of this webinar to ask some questions. As I said earlier, we will be going through this, through these presentations, and then leave that time at the end. Thanks for those that have joined as we continue the conversation. Next section that we're going to be talking about is Ready for 100. The campaign is part of the national movement to really look at the solution. How do we move to a renewable energy future? And what's our ultimate goal? How do we move to a renewable electricity system by 2035 for our cities and counties and communities all across the country? As I mentioned, Emily Hills, she was not able to make it tonight. She is at a coalition event, which is great. So I'm covering for her. Again, my name is Bryce Carter. I'm the Conservation Programs Manager for the Colorado Sierra Club. I've also been working on Ready for 100 across the state. Emily Hills is our campaign organizer for Ready for 100, specifically in Denver. She's from Michigan, and she's been in the area for over the last decade, as you can see here. And yeah, she's awesome. She's been a great organizer and contributing a lot. So as we talk about a little bit of the problem when it comes to why we need clean energy, I think no one on this call is going to be a stranger to it. Obviously, fossil fuels significantly contribute to climate change. We're feeling those impacts more and more, unfortunately. So we have seen our quality of life been hindered, whether it's, as you see here, the roads being washed out, the smoke from fires in the West Coast, droughts, and the flooding. So we've definitely experienced all sorts of challenges in just the last few years alone, and it's definitely going to be interesting times ahead as we continue these trends, unfortunately. Additionally, fossil fuels obviously cause a lot of public health impacts when we look at the pollution that comes from that, including ozone and airborne allergens like pollen. And for especially urban areas like the Denver metro area and the Front Range, we're seeing issues where we are in violation of ozone pollution. And unfortunately, the impacts for frontline communities are not felt equally. A lot of communities, especially communities of color, low-income communities, face the severity of these impacts. The image here is the Suncor refinery. Earlier, they had a power failure, and it resulted in sulfur being emitted straight into the neighborhood, where there was a shelter-in-place warning put out to families. And as you can imagine, that was a very scary circumstance to have to go through in your own neighborhood. And this is, while that incident obviously is very visible, things like freeways and power plants, and especially in the shadows of these facilities or these communities, are the places that we want to make sure have the solutions in hand first and foremost. Unfortunately, we do see children are much more likely to have asthma and other impacts. And, you know, as a Sierra Club and other organizations that we partner with, equity is a big part of what we want to approach this lens with as we do this work to make sure that, again, these communities are getting to resources first. And then fossil fuels are a long part of our history as Coloradans. Obviously, it's a sensitive issue when we talk about fracking and coal. So we are well aware of this, and we especially reflect on the history when it comes to labor, thinking about the issues and the fights that unions had to have in the early 1900s, with one of the most violent strikes happening here in Colorado back in 1913, 1914. So as we reflect on this work, we think about what it means for just and equitable transition to renewable energy future. And so as we look behind, we also look ahead and making sure that we are inclusive in this transition so that everyone gets the benefits of it. And then finally, another major issue is certainly the burden of energy costs. They can certainly exceed a family's total annual income. We saw this in Pueblo especially, and we continue to see this in Pueblo, where literally thousands of people are getting disconnects throughout each year, where they are literally living in the dark because they once they get disconnected, it takes upwards of $500 to $800 to be reconnected. There's actually a great article in the Sierra magazine, this current issue, and if you don't get the Sierra magazine, you can go ahead and Google it. I believe it's online there too, to read through that story that's happening there. So as I said, we see the impacts with children that are twice as likely to develop respiratory problems and 5 times as likely to develop mental health problems if the home is not properly heated. And what we see is a lot of families have to choose between, whether or not they're going to keep the lights on or food. And a study that came out that said when low-income households had to make a sacrifice, 24% went without food for at least a day, 37% went without medical or dental care, 34% did not fill a prescription or take a full dose, and 19% had become ill due to a poorly heated home. So when we think about this transition, it's much more than just the electric grid, but it's about the people who use it. And then certainly other issues which we hear about every winter is carbon monoxide poisoning, where folks use generators and don't properly vent them. And so we also, with the Sierra Club, we really want to elevate voices and making sure that people's stories are heard, because everyone has a different story of how these issues are impacting them. And in this picture is Maggie, who is a high school student from Denver South High School. And she has grown up in Colorado. She loves nature. And in this letter that she wrote to the mayor of Denver, she was talking about how she's having trouble breathing, and it's not because of the altitude, but with climate change. She's feeling the heat. She's feeling the turf that she runs on actually burns through her cleats when she's running, and she feels a lot of pain with that. And she, with her raw feet and also coughing attacks, she's realizing that this is becoming a new norm. And that's why it's important for cities like Denver to commit to 100% of renewable electricity and move away from fossil fuels so that we could really support a sustainable transition to a renewable energy future. So with all that said, the theory of change of the Ready for 100 campaign really is how do we build this public will where we work with every community across the country to support the transition to 100% clean energy. So whether we're working with companies, whether we're working with communities, and certainly our elected officials, what tactics can we have to move us forward and making commitments. And in Colorado, we've actually had a lot of success. We've had now 4 cities commit: Aspen, Boulder, Pueblo, and most recently Maryland, say that they want to move to 100% clean renewable energy in the electric sector. And we're really excited about that momentum. So we're seeing this goal accelerate. We're seeing momentum, and these successes are going to continue to climb. I'm going to talk a little bit about Denver, and specifically what the tactics that Emily's been deploying here is every community event they can get to, they're petitioning. They're working on letter and postcard writing. So as you can see, you can actually color it in, these postcards, and send them to the mayor and to other officials. So it's been a really cool and fun tactic that especially kids love to do. We've been showing up to educational community events and building up a wide and diverse coalition of community organizations and leaders. So Emily's been reaching out and showing up to tons of events, whether it's from the Suncor hearing that we had recently with the oil refinery to just other communities across the region to build up those relationships and to make sure as we're looking at this issue, we are being inclusive of all voices. And what's important, especially as we look at campaigns across the state and country, making sure we set up localized messaging. So for Denver specifically, we've been building up this campaign now for a couple of years. Last year, we had an event called the Clean Energy Celebration, where we brought in the mayor of Boulder, where she made a commitment for Boulder to move to 100%, and used that as political leverage with the city of Denver to say, hey, what can you do to look at renewable energy? And they did commit, the city, to look at whether or not they can achieve 100% renewable electricity by 2030 as part of their ambitious 80 by 50 goals by, that means 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, which Denver has committed to. So last week, Denver actually just released a climate action plan, which includes a recommendation to move toward 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We're really excited about this. but we know that we have to deliver the public support to make sure that this is seen through. And so the next 60 days are a crucial public comment period. So we're going to be organizing everything from town halls and getting comments submitted, house parties, you name it. We're going to be showing up and making sure that the public is informed and involved to demonstrate this support. So we are working to get over 800 comment submissions over the next 60 days, and we're going to be working through those variety of tactics that we talked about. And so whether in Denver or your own community, certainly some of the actions you can take is writing a letter to your mayor, especially talking about your personal story is going to be essential. That's what really connects people. Then certainly here in Denver, there's a public comment period. So making sure that if you live, work, or play in the city of Denver, having your voice heard is important. And then volunteer as we have upcoming events. And what I can do for this presentation is I can forward along some information. We actually have a couple dozen cities across Colorado that are in various stages of the Ready for 100 campaign. And we're really excited to have that momentum grow. So as I mentioned, Emily Hiltz is the organizer for Denver, and I'm the Conservation Programs Manager. I'm Bryce Carter, and I will be happy to send my information to everybody so you can connect afterward. Again, we'll wait until questions till the end just to make sure we condense this presentation portion and make sure we have the most time for discussions. So I would love to pass the mic on to Anna.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for jumping on. My name is Anna McDevitt. I am the organizing representative with Beyond Coal. And our Beyond Coal campaign is exactly what it sounds like. We are working to move our communities beyond coal here in Colorado and across the country. Specifically here in Colorado, we're trying to do that by 2030. So just to introduce myself a little bit more, again, my name's Anna. I'm not actually from Colorado. I'm one of those famous transplants. I grew up mostly in Virginia and Minnesota. My parents were in the Navy, so I did a lot of moving around. This picture over here to the right is what I look like. That's me and my dad at a coal rally out in Massachusetts a few years ago. I figured it was pretty fitting for this presentation. And I've been organizing around climate and energy issues for about 5 years now. I actually got my start in organizing as a political science student in college. It first started when I studied abroad. I studied abroad in India and saw over there, half a world away, the impacts of climate change on rural communities. So I met farmers who couldn't grow their crops anymore, and as a result couldn't send their kids to school. And that really hit me hard. And I came back to the U.S. and realized that we also are on the front lines of climate change, and we're experiencing those impacts in a really real way. And so I wanted to do something about it. And I got involved in the fossil fuel divestment campaign at my college, as well as some local work to stop the expansion of tar sands pipelines in Minnesota. But I also got to work on coal a little bit in there, starting with some work I did in New Hampshire to shut down one of New England's dirtiest coal plants, to this fun fact I shared here. Probably my favorite coal action that I've ever done was a 67-mile march in Massachusetts from the site of Brayton Point Coal Plant, which was the dirtiest coal plant in Massachusetts. And that march was a 6-day march with about 100 of us to the proposed site of what would have been the nation's first offshore wind farm. And it was awesome. We had all kinds of media come out as a result of the event. And that was one of our last big events before they actually did decide to retire the coal plant. So that's kind of my local fun fact that I want to share. I also spent the last couple of years working on building support for the Clean Power Plan here in Colorado, which was a plan that would basically it would cut coal-fired power plant pollution by about 30%. So that's kind of the work that I've done on coal, and it's why I'm excited to be now working with the Sierra Club on our Beyond Coal campaign. So that said, I'll just jump into it. I think Bryce did a really good job of talking about some of the basic problems with the way we source energy and distribute it in Colorado. And so I'm just going to briefly cover the basics here. And I'll start with Colorado's status as a clean energy leader. Historically, we definitely have been elevated among other states when it comes to clean energy, but we're falling behind on that. Most of our public officials still tout things like our renewable energy standard that's going to be expiring here in 2020. or things like clean jobs, clean air from back in 2010. And so we're definitely falling behind, which is too bad, because we actually, compared to most states, have some of the best solar and wind energy potential in the country. You've seen all the windmills on our eastern plains, and we could be doing a lot more. Last year, we actually got 78% of our electricity from fossil fuels as a state, and 55% of that was generated by coal-fired power plants. So that's what we're looking at right now here in Colorado. And that said, there's a couple of things that we do know about what coal means for Colorado. There's three specifically that I want to share. The first one is climate change. Our Colorado communities are on the front lines of climate change, and the science shows us that burning coal is definitely making that problem worse. As a country, we actually get about a third, or our coal burning is responsible for about a third of our carbon emissions. And, we've all seen the science that carbon dioxide is causing climate change. One great example of that is that 2016 was the hottest year on record, and before that it was 2015, before that it was 2014. So we're seeing a pattern here, and it's especially obvious here in Colorado, primarily in our mountain communities. I'm sure that you all have seen the bark beetle infestations. Right now we're looking at the possibility of 67% of our forests being dead because of bark beetle infestations by the end of the century. We're seeing more wildfires. They're lasting longer. We have 3 going on right now as the result of lightning strikes in our western slope. We're definitely seeing shorter ski seasons. And if you're like me and you're a skier, you're really bummed about that. And then we're also seeing the impacts on the Front Range. So we are having longer heat waves. And a recent study actually just came out to show that cities like Denver could have a month of 100-degree days by the end of the century here. And so in addition to that, we've got more frequent and severe weather events. If you live on the Front Range, you probably experienced the hailstorm that happened earlier this spring. That hailstorm was one of the most, I think it was the most costly natural catastrophe that the state of Colorado has seen, according to some insurance associations. And we're going to start seeing more of those as a result of climate change. So that's one of the big reasons that we're looking to transition off coal in the state of Colorado. Number 2 is, it's impacting our air quality and our public health. Those are at stake when we burn coal, and Bryce did a really good job of talking about that when he was talking about Ready for 100, so I'll just cover it briefly. I've got a couple favorite numbers here that I like to share for how important it is. So the first is that, nationally, coal burning has been linked to about 13,000 premature deaths each year. That's about $100 billion in annual health costs. We talked briefly about asthma in Colorado, and then just a couple of numbers I want to share there are that 500,000 Coloradans do have asthma, and that results in about 11,000 ER visits every year just for children alone. And we even have National Jewish Health here in Colorado that does a lot of really great modeling and testing around the ways that air particulate matter impact children in Colorado, and we're really easily able to kind of like the dots between some of our fossil fuel infrastructure and those asthma problems. Making the problem worse is our problem with ozone in Colorado. You may have seen in recent media that Denver and Fort Collins are both in the top 10 in the nation as far as the highest levels of ground level ozone pollution. And studies have come out to show that about 32,000 asthma attacks were caused by that smog last year in Colorado alone. So those numbers are pretty alarming, and it's one of the reasons that we do want to transition off of dirty coal. And then the third thing that I wanted to touch on is that burning coal is an environmental justice concern for our communities here in Colorado. For those of you who are still learning about environmental injustice, the way I like to think about it is that it's what happens when certain communities or human groups are disproportionately affected by higher levels of pollution or other environmental risks. And that's compared to other segments of society who don't, for example, have to live by them. So I think this picture is actually a great example of that here in Colorado. This is the Martin Drake coal plant in Colorado Springs. And if you've ever driven south on I-25 or north from New Mexico there, you've seen this coal plant. It's right in the heart of downtown. And there's actually 42 schools that are within 5 miles of the plant, which studies have shown are where air particulate matter does impact people the most. So A lot of those schools are actually even within 2 miles of that coal plant. And so those children, compared to other children around the state, are more exposed to these kinds of toxins and this pollution. And as a result, we see medical impacts there that other kids don't necessarily have to be subjected to. So that's just a good example. Another example is the Comanche coal units that are down in Pueblo. So Xcel Energy provides about 50% of our state's energy, but Pueblo is not included in that. Pueblo actually gets their electricity from a utility called Black Hills. So this coal plant that is owned by Xcel Energy in Pueblo is giving that community all the pollution of the coal plant, but none of the electricity. I don't think I'm alone when I think that it's not okay that people are experiencing the health impacts of a dirty coal plant, but not getting any of its energy at all. So those are some of the reasons that we're working on Beyond Coal here in Colorado. So that's where Beyond Coal does come in. This is a national campaign. It's just to give you some background, it's been around since the early 2000s in the Bush-Cheney era. It was the result of a proposal to build about 200 new coal plants across the country back then. That was around the time when folks were really connecting the dots about climate change and realizing, okay, burning coal is causing this problem. We can't afford to lock ourselves into new fossil fuel infrastructure that's going to continue burning for decades and decades. So, folks just really stood up, and we started the Beyond Coal campaign. And since then have retired 257 coal plants, as you can see from this little countdown tracker on the right here. That's current. We have 266 coal plants to go. We just recently did the 257th, and we're hoping that the next one can be here in Colorado. You can check out some of our national goals here. They're pretty simple, but we want to make sure that we are retiring these coal plants and replacing that electricity with clean energy solutions, such as wind and solar and geothermal. Another big piece of our campaign is making sure that we're not replacing this energy capacity with dirty fuels like natural gas. And then I should just mention that a piece of the campaign is working to keep coal in the ground. So in addition to retiring dirty coal plants, we want to make sure that we're not digging out any new coal that will be burned and create more carbon dioxide. So a lot of that's happening out in the east, but we do have coal mines here in Colorado. You may have heard recently about the West Elk mine and efforts to expand some of that mining near Paonia. That's a good example of where we have coal mining happening here in Colorado. So our Colorado campaign, does have its own unique goals compared to the rest of the country. We are looking to decarbonize the electric sector in Colorado by 2030. And the exciting thing about the Colorado campaign is that we're just relaunching it. So if you've been following the Sierra Club in Colorado for a while, you probably know that we did have a Beyond Coal presence a few years back. We had a small lapse in that, and now we're just starting to rebuild again across the state. So the current goal is to decarbonize and retire those coal plants by 2030. And the way we're going to do that is by putting pressure on coal operators. So, for example, utilities like Xcel. And we're going to put pressure on them and raise ambition to move towards 100% clean energy future by 2030. That aligns pretty closely with the goals of the Ready for 100 campaign. So we're just excited to work hand in hand across the state to make that happen. We're going to do that through intersectional grassroots advocacy. So making sure that we're bringing all kinds of voices to the table on these issues, health experts, academia, the communities that are impacted by local coal plants. We need everyone at the table if we're going to make sure that the transition away from coal is a just and equitable one. Another tactic of ours is to engage at the regulatory level. So for example, right now, this fall, we're looking at opportunities for the public to engage with the Public Utilities Commission. They're in the process of doing energy resource planning that we're hoping will have a public comment period that will be open, and folks can write and call in to talk about where they want their energy to come from in the state of Colorado. And then the last piece of that is just making sure that we're engaging with the media. So we'll be doing all kinds of media events, and on top of that, working with people like you across the state who might be interested in writing letters to the editor and making sure that we are starting the conversation around, or continuing, I suppose, the conversation around retiring Colorado's coal plants. just to give you an idea of some of the main places we're looking at the Comanche units that are down in Pueblo that I mentioned earlier, the Martin Drake units in Colorado Springs. This picture on the right is another photo of that. As you can see, it's right in the heart of downtown Colorado Springs. Rawhide is a power plant up near Estes Park in Fort Collins. And then Craig has a couple of coal units that we're looking to help retire early and replace with renewable capacity. So why now? Why is this important? Well, there's a couple things. One, climate change is threatening our Colorado communities now. As we mentioned, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump isn't going to do anything to help us get off coal here in Colorado and across the country. So if we're, going to transition to a clean energy economy, it's up to us, on the ground level here in the communities to make sure that that happens. Number two, Colorado is now part of the U.S. Climate Alliance within the Paris Agreement. Around the same time that our Governor Hickenlooper added Colorado to that list, he also issued a much-needed executive order to help us cut our greenhouse gas emissions. And so one of the pieces of that new executive order is to reduce our carbon emissions in our power sector 25% by 2025 and then 35% by 2030. We can't do that unless we retire Colorado's existing coal plants early and transition them to renewable energy. So it's really good to have our sights set on hitting those standards. And then the third thing is that we're at this really exciting place in Colorado where renewables are now finally cheaper than coal. We're really excited about that because it means on top of the public sentiment that clearly shows folks are in favor of clean energy, we also have the economy on our side. So now more than ever is the time to be talking about getting off coal and replacing it with cheaper renewable electricity. And then the other thing is that we do have a really timely opportunity to act. I mentioned the opportunity for public engagement at the Public Utilities Commission this fall. That's because Xcel Energy just proposed something they call the Colorado Energy Plan. It's part of their energy resource planning process that they do every 4 years here in the state of Colorado. And they want the public to weigh in on it this fall. We don't know exactly when that's going to be yet, but there will be a public comment period in which we'll need folks to weigh in. So it really is, a timely opportunity for us to be launching Beyond Coal here in Colorado. So that said, the best way that you can help out the Beyond Coal campaign is to help us build it across the state. We need your help. We can't do it without you. We need volunteers to step up as Beyond Coal ambassadors in our Colorado communities. And that's nothing formal. It's not something that we totally even have fleshed out yet, but we want to make sure that some of our Sierra Club local volunteers are bringing retiring coal plants into the conversation when we talk about clean energy in our communities, especially within the context of Ready for 100. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely let me know, let Bryce know, and we'd love to plug you into some of the work that we're looking at doing. There's my email address. Feel free to shoot me a note. There's also my phone number. You're welcome to give me a call, and I would be excited to work with any of you to retire all of Colorado's dirty coal plants. Thanks, folks.
So is Piper, our office dog here, clearly. Excellent. Well, thank you all for bearing with us. We actually are pretty much on time, which is great. This first session, we wanted to make sure that we present a couple different stories here. So let me go ahead and unmute everybody and just give you all a chance to ask some questions of us. So let me see first how I can do that as we work through the technology here. Let's see, here it is.
The conference has been unmuted.
Great. So we had a few more folks join, but we'd love to just open up for questions based on everything you just heard.
One thing that I've heard over here on the West Slope is that some communities are stuck in energy contracts that won't really let them be progressive in terms of if they decide to get off coal, they can't because of the contract. And then also something about tri-state. I don't know if that's a coal plant or what it is. Tri-State seems to be the sort of really governing the progressive getting up a coal campaign. So is that true, or what's going on?
Yeah, no, Eric, that's an excellent question. So the way Tri-State works is that they're a wholesale provider of electricity, and as part of that, they enter into agreements with regional electric co-ops. So it might be multiple communities that own the electric grid together, and then they purchase that electricity. And what has happened is those contracts often say that they cannot produce more than 5% or 10% of their energy locally. And in the past, that wasn't that big of an issue, but now that renewable energy is so cheap, a lot of communities are just saying, well, why do we even need to work with Tri-State when we can just go off the grid and purchase our own electricity? So the specific answer to your question of what's going on is that one of those co-ops, Delta Montrose, said they actually sued in a federal federal energy regulatory commission, saying that they have a right to produce as much local electricity as they want. And they actually they won, but they were appealed, and then we changed to the Trump administration. So it's uncertain where that case is going to go, but obviously it's going to continue to be a big issue. And the biggest leverage that we have for a campaign like Ready for 100, and as we talk about Beyond Coal, ultimately are these franchise agreements. It's pretty much the idea of collective bargaining power for these communities to gain up on these utilities and say, hey, we as customers, we expect a clean, renewable, just energy system. And if you can't provide that for us, then we might shop elsewhere. And in fact, Tri-State, within, I think, the last year or so, they lost a customer down in New Mexico, where they actually had one of those electric co-ops commit to renewable energy, and they partnered with another agency, and they actually left Tri-State altogether. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I had one question, and I assume that I can just go on the Sierra Club website to find perhaps a calendar of the educational outings that I believe Kim had talked about in the first presentation?
Yes, that is correct. You can go to the Sierra Club Colorado website. There is a calendar of all of our upcoming outings and events that are going on across the state. And down in Colorado Springs, actually, we have a really great group of volunteers that do pretty regular outings in some of our target areas where we're working to make sure that they're managed properly, basically. So we should have a couple outings out in the Pike San Isabel Forest coming up in the next few months.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Well, how do we get a hold of the voice recorded part of this meeting, Bryce? What do we do?
So I'm still recording right now. Once we wrap up this call, I'm going to download a video and put it on YouTube. I might actually even break it down further by campaign so you can just hear each 15-minute segment. And we'll send that out to everyone that RSVP'd for tonight.
Okay.
As well as on the website.
Okay, great.
I just wanted to thank everybody for all of their hard work and effort that you've put into this. We really do appreciate that. And it's really easy to become overwhelmed and complacent in the current times. And you guys really do give me a lot of inspiration that we can all work together to affect change.
Andrea, right back at you. It's people like you who are getting on these calls and looking for ways to learn more and get involved that keep us going. So thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. Well, if there are no more questions, we can then wrap up a little bit early for this hour. any other last questions or thoughts before we wrap up?
I think you guys have covered everything I needed. Thank you.
Good.
Great. Well, so this is the first of the webinar series. So as you have feedback for how we can do this more effectively, usually we will do one, maybe two different campaigns per call. That way we can dig a little bit more in depth into some of these issues. I know some of our issue teams have talked about wildlife and wolves, as well as pesticides being some of the next calls. So I'll be working with them to schedule those. So please do keep an eye on that calendar that Kim was just mentioning. And we'll definitely keep you all apprised.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you. You
Thanks
too.
a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.